He knows I'm making a film about him, and I think he wants to be a part of it.
He followed me down to my bedroom and he punched me in the head 6 times.
Michael Organ is a black hole.
You kind of get taken along for the ride.
And I'll fall in. It took about 5 years to make this, and honestly, breaking it down into days seems terrifying. If it took 6 years on and off, and that was my life for that time. The crew on the road was really small for Mister Organ. It was just me, Dom Fry, our DP, and Danny Watts, our soundie. So on the road, 3 people. How many hours of footage to comb through? I mean, be hundreds of hours. I mean, this was about a man, Michael Organ, who would not shut up. And so there was just so much of Michael Organ talking. They at least 100 hours.
A full-scale war was breaking out on the streets of an Auckland suburb.
A wheel clamper who was then demanding they pay to get their vehicles back.
You are a crook. I'm literally trying to give you $400 cash.
I set out to make a documentary about a con man in my neighborhood in New Zealand who I was curious about, and I wanted to find out what he was doing. And then as I filmed, he sort of enjoyed the process. And so I started hanging out with him. And at that point, he started becoming involved in my own life. And that's when things took a very different direction for me and for the film. There was a period about 2 years in where I just got lost in Michael Organ. And I knew I was making a documentary about someone who kind of sucked people into this vortex of sort of nothingness. And I'd been interviewing people about this, you know, talking about their deep depression and spending time with this man. And I kind of just thought I would be invincible to that. Tickled was stressful, but I had this little crew around me and I felt sort of invincible. He just gets under your skin, and I hadn't realized he had done that. And once I did, I was so far into the documentary. I'd spent so much of my time with the project. I'd talked to so many of his victims who I'd promised I would be able to tell their story and hopefully create some sort of meaningful change. And so there was that pressure. But on a personal level, I just wanted to get the fuck out of there. You know, I didn't want to be there any longer. I wanted out. But there was this crushing realization that I'd already sort of put too much of myself and my resources and my friends' resources into this. Plus, people were relying on me in a way to tell the story. And so that just felt like a horrible trap to be in. And knowing that I would have to spend more time with this particular man was just, it was just an awful feeling.
I know there must be more to this car park terrorist, and I want to find out what.
People won't talk because they're frightened. He's a very dangerous man.
In New Zealand, what he did was involve me in a variety of court cases that had nothing to do with me. And so I got sucked into this courtroom drama. And I was in LA having to dial into court in New Zealand and sit in court for days, dealing with Mr. Organ's fictitious bullshit that he'd come up with. And so that was one way he kind of dragged me into that. That's calmed down at the moment. And I think that's just because, you know, he's still out there in the world. You know, this documentary, you know, it's not about someone who's in prison or someone who's dead. This is about someone who is like alive and functioning in the world in this really disturbing way. And so he's still out there doing things. He's moved on. I'm sort of touch wood and all that. He's moved on from me at the moment, which is great. But also he's the sort of guy that will like pop back into my life at some point in the future. I have like very little doubt. It's what he does.
This man was dangerous.
How did you know that he'd been to my house?
Just talked all about you and said that he's onto you.
They give me a key to your home.
That does seem quite weird. I mean, I'd prefer you didn't have a key to my house.
Holy shit.
This is fucking crazy.
There were times when I did think about bailing just for safety reasons. I mean, you know, once I knew that he had been around to the house and had been on the property and had a key, you know, and by this point I knew that he liked sneaking and creeping around houses. You know, that's sort of part of the thing I found out about him. And, you know, I was living with 3 other flatmates. I think you call them housemates in America at the time. You know, I didn't want to bring my shit into their lives. And so, yeah, I had to have conversations with them. You know, this possibly psychotic man that I'm working with has a key to the house. I think you should know this. This is why I'm changing the locks today. And also New Zealand's just such a small place. And so it is hard to hide. Like everything's out in the open. And once someone knows where you live, it's not a great feeling. I made a very specific decision that once the film was wrapped, that I would not communicate with him again. And it's a weird thing to talk about, but he did really mess me up mentally. Like, a big part of the reason I'm talking to you from LA right now is I left New Zealand to get away from him. It was just a logical time to finish the film from another country, and some work came up here for 3 months, and I just ended up staying here because it was just such a clean cut thing to do. You know, New Zealand is such a small place. If you make a documentary that puts a spotlight on someone, you're going to be bumping into them on the street at some point. And so physically removing myself from New Zealand was really important. Changed addresses, changed numbers, blocked all my emails from any way he could contact me there. And so I made a really hard effort to cut him off completely, just for my own sort of well-being.
There's a gap in my blinds, and I keep thinking when I open my eyes, I'll see him staring back at me through the gap.
Michael Organ has seen the film. So, and a lot of the documentary ends up taking place in this bank building that he lives in, that he's like moved all these antiques into. That's in this little town in New Zealand called Whanganui, and directly opposite that bank is the local cinema, and they played Mister Organ. And yeah, he went most times, like most nights he went. He sat in the back, and the few people I talked to that clocked that it was him, unsurprisingly, they just said he talked through the whole thing. So I had this kind of dream of sneaking a microphone in and having him like record a director's commentary track of just him mumbling about what he thought of the film. Didn't do that, obviously. But yeah, he's seen the film a number of times.
You're going to tell a New York attorney what a felony is in his own country. This one right here, buddy.
You're not a member of the bar.
I certainly am able to practice law.
You are not a member of the bar. You're not admitted to the New York State Bar.
There was a version I was playing with of Mr. Organ where I was going to bring in Tickled into that, because I remember one of the first times I walked into the antique store to talk to Michael, he obviously didn't quite know who I was, but I just saw his computer and he was obviously Googling my name and Tickle, because I just saw posters of Tickled come up. And that was almost this foreboding thing of like, oh no, these two men, they're the same men. Like David D'Amato and Mr. Organ, they're very, very similar. You had two men that were incredible narcissists that liked having these sort of holding power over people in different ways. That was like really clear. I didn't expect him to come to the screenings just like David D'Amato did in Tickled. And there were so many things that were similar between these two men. You know, both were really obsessed with religious history in a really intense way. They'd go on long diatribes about that. Both men loved pretending to be lawyers. Both men loved taking on different personas and signing off emails as different people. Both were pests on the internet. I mean, I think both men had issues with their sexuality, which I don't delve into in a big way on the film, but it is definitely running in the background of both Tickled and Mr. Organ, are these questions over sexuality.
Every single day with Michael Organ is like hell. It's like high velocity hell. He's the kind of guy that if you're talking to him for 10 minutes, that 10 minutes will turn into 10 hours.
I spent so many hours in the edit with Dan Kircher, who was cutting this thing. And yeah, we would turn to Trump at various times because he was president during a great deal of us cutting this film. You know, we both remarked that Michael is living in the perfect age where if you are a confidence man and you can just confidently say your own version of reality, it was like deeply believe it in yourself and just march through life like that, not really caring about other people, you can get really far. And, you know, that was Michael's entire MO, was creating a version of reality and just running with it. And it worked for him. You know, he has more money than I have. Financially, he's better off. It has worked for him, what he does. And I think a certain sort of person in today's world, yeah, gets by very well if you just confidently carry on with whatever your bullshit is. And that will work for you. I don't think Michael could have done this in a different age. I think he's living in the perfect time to do what he does.
He won't let go.
You probably would have been quite an interesting person to know if you weren't such a cunt.